and everything works just fine.
And because we know, and I'll say that we have research that says that image does not equal the way you feel.
Welcome back. I'm Doc Jen.
And I'm Dr. Dom.
And we are here with another PT Pearl, this time talking about scoliosis, what the heck it means, how to fix it within the body, and then some of our own personal stories and relationship to scoliosis.
This is going to be a fun one because, Jen, you actually have some scoliosis, don't you?
I do.
Yeah. So we're going to dive in a little bit to her story, a little bit of what different people and schools of thoughts may say about scoliosis, what it is, and hopefully if you have ever heard of this or have had some issues with scoliosis yourself, we might give you a few tips to help open up your body and find some independence in that journey.
Yeah, and allow you to feel better about it. I think that's the main thing, because especially when you hear scoliosis, it's such a clinical term, right? It's a diagnosis. But what does it mean? I mean, and I think when we start to define it and bring relevance to the different types and what it actually means in the body will help to free up the worry about it. Scoliosis in general is a lateral curve of the spine. Lateral meaning side to side. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, if you look at an anatomy textbook, right, or a skeleton, a fake skeleton, you're going to see that the spine is in one straight line when you're looking at it to the front. Obviously, when you look at someone from the side, they have these natural curves through the neck, upper back, low back, and then into the tailbone. So those are like the natural curves that we deem normal, mm-hmm. right? But anytime we then get a curve to the side, whether it's usually in the upper back and then down to the low back, and there's varying degrees, that's when we look at it as bad.
So if we see this curve on an x-ray and you go in, and say you're getting an x-ray on a shoulder, and then all of a sudden the doc comes in and says, "Oh my gosh, you have scoliosis."
I think it's an awful thing the way that if it was presented like that, because if you were having zero problems with it before and no back pain, and then all of a sudden you have this thing that you're like, oh, now I can blame everything on it. And honestly, that's what happened with me. But I do believe that when I saw my x-ray and saw that I had scoliosis, because I had zero issues in my body, competing in calisthenics, practicing and learning acro yoga, doing back bends and yoga and lifting and all of these different things that I was doing. And then all of a sudden I see that I have scoliosis in my spine. Any little pain or restriction in my body, well, then it was like, well, it's because of my scoliosis. It's because of my scoliosis. And I would say it's honestly not until this year, which is like 6 years later, that I'm like, why am I blaming everything on this? And it wasn't until I got that diagnosis. And so that's why sometimes I have a hard time with imaging. I get that we want to know the why, but that's not necessarily the why. That's just a picture. That's not how I function. And that's where we also have to bring up the fact of diagnosing it when someone is standing and doing an x-ray and standing. Well, how was I shifting, and how, that's why we can't look at posture and have that determine everything, because it doesn't. It did not stop me from doing that. And I have no idea if my spine is aligned.
Because you haven't gone and gotten another x-ray at this point, have you?
I don't want to.
And you don't really want to. And I think that that's an important message too, especially from Jen, somebody who is competing high level in calisthenics, somebody who does handstands, somebody who does this and that, who is a doctor of physical therapy herself, and still when she was told that, allowed it to change her story a little bit.
Totally.
I always want people to be aware of the things that the doctors tell you. Don't let that define you, and don't let that define your story, because it's just a little bit more information and awareness.
The chiropractor was amazing. So he didn't say, oh my gosh, you have this, like, look at your spine. First of all, I thought he was punking me when I first saw it. I was like, you put someone else's spine up there. I was like, that's a joke. But it wasn't. It was my spine. But all he said was like, you know what? You're not having any issues. You're not having any pain. Maintain exactly what you're doing in your body. Stay healthy, stay mobile, stay active, and you'll be fine. And I was like, okay, cool. And people still ask me to today, well, what was your degrees and what was the, and like, we didn't measure the degrees because it's not about that. It wasn't like, where's my function? I'm not going to let a degree of something define even more what I can and cannot do because I was already doing a lot.
What Jen's talking about with, what was the degree, every scoliosis curve is then defined by a degree of how big the curve is or how many degrees this curve holds. And again, some can have degrees of greater than 50, which are quite advanced cases of scoliosis, and some might just have a 10-degree curve. And again, like Jen said, it's not about the degrees. It's okay, how then is that presenting, and what and why are the underlying reasons as to why we may have developed that curve?
Yeah, I contribute my mobility that I have in my body to keeping me from developing exasperated symptoms and problems and outlooks of how it presented. It was just incredible of what the body is able to adapt to when we give it the freedom to just improve on mobility, improve on strength, and don't let images and diagnoses and ranges hold you captive.
To talk a little bit more about scoliosis, there's a few different types of scoliosis. So the main type is called idiopathic scoliosis, which that in itself means we don't know what causes it, scoliosis. And they say that can be up to 70 to 80% of cases. And then their other types are more so a congenital, meaning we're kind of born with a different structural thing that might cause us to have a little bit of curve. A neuromuscular, which can happen with different nervous system disorders like spina bifida or a spinal cord injury or something like that. Degenerative, which is one that happens more so later in life when we might be having different degenerative changes of our skeletal system, as they say in Canada, that might start to cause some of these different curves. And so what we're going to focus more so on is that idiopathic type, because that is going to be the greatest amount, and that generally presents with people when they're in that like 10 to 18 year age, and that's
more females,
right? Usually more females, and that's when you tend to see those curves progress the most until maturity, when they kind of find their resting place, unless they progress to a certain point, and then they may continue to progress beyond that. But you generally see the most progression in that 10 to 18 year range, slightly more females than males. And that's just, a little more background on scoliosis itself. So we're focusing idiopathic, or the we don't know what causes it scoliosis.
And you haven't had surgery.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to note too, because surgery just changes things. So the moment that you get surgery, you are going to have different restrictions. You're going to have different movement things that you are able to then do with your body because it changes.
We looked at one study that was a big review of adult cases that then went and had surgery. And it said that, okay, structurally we would see some improvement, and clinically they would note some improvement. But then right after that, it would say over 40% of the cases that had the surgery had fairly significant adverse perioperative events, which means they just had some, bad side effects of the surgery after. So 40%. So it was almost a coin flip whether it would benefit and you didn't have anything adverse happening after that.
Yeah.
So again, the surgery, we might be able to make something look slightly different. And, in the short term or in an immediate term follow-up, you might have some improvement of that symptom, that end symptom that you were feeling. But what did we change as far as how we move, or as far as why that curve developed in the first place? Because even though they say idiopathic, things in our bodies happen for a certain reason. And there can be so many things inside and out that can impact the symmetry or the way our body looks.
Yeah. We need to stop just focusing on what the structure and the photo looks like, because we shouldn't be seeking this perfect posture, this perfect symmetry when we don't function on a regularity like that on the inside, and everything works just fine.
And because we know, and I'll say that we have research that says that image does not equal the way you feel. Again, Jen had an image that looked that had scoliosis, and she had no symptoms at all.
And think about it, like you probably write with one hand. You probably use one hand when you're doing more things. You probably
Cooking.
put a bag over one shoulder more than the other. And these aren't bad things, but it's just when we continue to do it on one side more than the other, you can see how that's going to just pull on different structures. That's going to create differences within the entire body. And our goal isn't to be a completely, what is it called when you use both hands?
Ambidextrous.
Thank you. That's not the overall goal of what we're going for, but we're going for an awareness of where we put the tendencies into one side more than the other, and how we can just start to expand and open up. So that's going to go into our mobility and self-assessing with that. It's going to go into our strength and not being afraid to get strong. It is not just about yoga and stretching. Like, we need strength within our body. It is so crucial to be a strong human as you age, no matter what age you are.
The spine is a very, very complex organ in that it bends forward and back, it bends side to side, and it rotates. So we work in 3 planes of motion, and really the pulls that come from the rotational and the side to side plane can be really important to just start exploring and to say, oh wow, I don't rotate as much this way. I don't side bend as much this way. And that's the side that's really tight. And is that correlated to what's happening in my spine? Let's explore and let's see if I can start to feel a difference in how those symptoms feel. I kind of dove into a great, one place that you could start to explore just in how that spine moves laterally. So side to side, how the spine moves in rotation, and how the spine moves forward and back. Doing that alone, you can start to find like, oh wow, when I try to go this way, I hit a wall.
This is why, again, I am going to preach into the optimal body a little bit, because it's so pertinent that people continue to explore and become aware of their body.
And just in me doing those optimal body exercises and the way Jen cues them, again, I'm a physical therapist. I like to think that I'm fairly aware of my body. And the way that she cues me through these things, I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I knew I had some things in my right low side back, but it's specifically when I do these motions that I really can, feel that. And the awareness that doing those workouts brought me, I know that you guys would find it. So, shameless plug. We like to throw those in there. Scoliosis. What's next?
I mean, really just don't be afraid of it. It's so common. 70 to 80% of all scoliosis cases, again, are idiopathic, meaning we don't exactly know where it came from.
I think I saw something like the prevalence, and we'll try to link up all the studies that we have that we're reading from, so you know where we're getting some of this stuff. But it said something like 1 point something to up to 5% of people in certain studies have some degree of a scoliotic curve. So, 1 out of every 100 people walking around might have this thing. But again,
I think it's way more common than that too.
Totally. And the 5% is like more out of 1 out of 20 people. And I think that some degree of a curve, potentially, symptoms, maybe not.
And in order to, hopefully prevent that degenerative scoliosis that happens later in life, where you really see people tilting, move. We have to move more every single day. Mobility, strength, core, all of it. We have to move more. That's how you start to prevent that. So don't be afraid to move. Don't be afraid to move that spine in different directions. Even if it's stuck one way more than the other.
Right.
Explore.
All right, thanks so much for joining our chat on scoliosis. If you guys have any specific topics, any specific diagnoses, anything health related that you want us to talk about and give you a few of our thoughts, comment below. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll see you on our next Pearl.